worry. But I wanted to go over something really quickly before we keep going with where we left off. If you're looking at your syllabus, and I kind of mentioned this about a week ago or a little less, if you're looking at your syllabus on the 24th, so Thursday the 24th, Thursday. Okay, part 2 of your paper is here. Okay, so I just want to take a moment just to talk about it. I know you had the library video that you watched and the APA video that you watched. The APA formatting, you don't need to worry about till the final paper. So that video will just probably just hang out there. And if you need it later, it'll be a good resource. But if you're on our Canvas page, I kind of reorganized it when we switched to in-person, but all the way at the bottom under modules are all the participations, the paper, and the test. So I kind of put all the assignments there together. So right here at the top is paper part 2, if we click on that. And I have the instructions here. They're the same ones that were there for part 1, but with part 2, which is due on the 24th. So what is that, about it's about 3 weeks from today, exactly. Yes, my math isn't great, right? 3 weeks from today, I got it. Part 2 of the paper is worth 40 points, right? And you're submitting it here online. Let me see if I can make this a little bigger, a little small. Here we go. So you're submitting it here online, just like you did with the first part. And I talked about this a little bit before, but what I want to see in this part of the paper is that you're making some progress toward the final paper. And so I'll talk about it a little bit more today and see if you have any questions, because ideally you're starting to work on it soon, right? So you still have 3 weeks. It's due before spring break, which I did on purpose because I want you to actually be able to enjoy your spring break. So what I want from this paper is you can give me more of like a rough draft, or you can give me more of like a bulleted outline. It doesn't matter as much on the formatting as much as I'm looking for content. What I end up seeing a lot from people in this this part is maybe they'll have like written their summary, and then they have like bulleted like points or thoughts about like other things in their paper. And it can be totally a mixed format like that. That's fine. If you want to maybe start writing portions of the paper, that's fine. If it all is bulleted, that's okay. The big thing is that I'm just looking for progress. So maybe you have some ideas about a diagnosis. So you haven't narrowed it down, but you have a few ideas. Or you have the criteria for that diagnosis, or some examples of scenes in the show or the movie that support whatever it is you might be looking at for your character. Maybe you've written the summary, whatever it is, like, you know, elements of the paper. I'm looking for that progress. And it should be about 2 to 3 pages in total. All right, so I have that right here, 2 to 3 pages. So progress toward the final paper, some content and material, but then I'm also really looking for that source. Right, and this is where that library video that you watched will come into play. It should be an academic source like we talked about before. The DSM is a very easy one you could all use, a journal article, a book, other than our textbook. But that's worth 10 points of the 40. It doesn't have to be in any kind of format, but you do need to have like the whole citation information there. But it doesn't need to be an APA yet. You're welcome to try it if you want to start doing that. There's some great like free citation generators online. I think she talked a little bit about that too in her APA video about how to find some great resources. But the big part of this paper, again, is just progress. So the more you give me, the more feedback I can give you. Like if you have more of like a rough draft, I can give you more feedback than just bullets. But that's true at any point. But so the final paper is due on April 21st. At any point before the final paper is due, you can send me a rough draft. I'd be happy to look it over, tell you if you're missing anything or you need to add anything or anything like that. But this part is worth 40 points. So you want to make sure that you are starting to work on it. Really find a good source. Again, DSM is an easy one that you could all use. But I wanted to see if there were any questions about this or anything else that I can kind of elaborate on so you feel good as you're starting to think about it at all. Yeah, we'll go here and then I'll go back. Yeah. One source, that's it. So on your final paper, you should have a references page and it'll have your show and the one source. You're welcome to use more than that, but you only need one. So let's say that you really want to use like Wikipedia or something that's not academic. Just make sure you also have an academic source. Yeah.
As far as that one source goes, the only thing I can find about someone. It's not about like the diagnosis. It's about like the article can just be about whatever you're diagnosing with this particular.
Yeah, if it's helpful for you and you're going to use it in some way in your paper, that's totally fine. It doesn't have to specifically be about the diagnosis. As long as it's helpful, you're going to need something to help you with the like diagnostic criteria and maybe even causes and treatment. And so you are, again, welcome to have more than one. But yeah, if you found an interesting article, by all means, the articles are totally fine. They're academic source. Yeah.
I remember that question. So you could reference like a case study.
Yeah, that'd be totally fine. What I don't want you to do is only use something like Wikipedia or like IMDb for your summary or something like that. Or, maybe you only reference our textbook or only reference our lecture. I want you to have some other outside academic source, but you can use as many as you want. Most people just use one. You're welcome to add another one if you find something that you want to use, by all means. Yeah.
Do we have to say that anything for them?
In the final paper, you're supposed to, yes. So I teach research methods. This class isn't research methods, right? But I do want you to try out APA formatting. And so in the final paper, I'll give you very specific what I'm looking for. Basically, just as like a preview, all I want is that you have a references page. So if it says works cited or bibliography, I know right off the bat you can do APA. You'll have to have a title page, and then a couple of references on that last page and in the paper. So I'm not going to be super strict about it at all. That isn't the scope of this class, but I do want you to try it. So for this part especially, you don't need to worry about APA at all. But if you want to try it, and a lot of people sometimes will make a cover page here just to practice it, and I can give you feedback. It's totally up to you. Yeah.
Do you want us to cite, like if we do reference the lecture, do you want us to cite it in text?
You can, yeah, right.
So if you look at an example of how you
So they did it really well in the on our page here. If I go back one page, underneath modules here, I have some great resources that the library gave me all the way up at the top, I believe here. Sorry, making it bigger. Okay, so if you go all the way to the top, right? So here's the very top of the module section. Here's the information about the paper. Right, and then I have some great sample papers right here. If you want to see how other people wrote their papers, these are all ones that got an A, and they're really well done, and they're all a little bit different. And then underneath it, here's the Writing Center handout, and they show you exactly actually how to cite a lecture and the DSM and an article. So we've been working together, the library and I, on this for a while, and so they've catered it to us, which is really, really nice. And then I also included their PowerPoint slides. So you can see in both how to do that really easily and how to make a title page. And then I also included some library resources where you can access the DSM online, which isn't always easy to do. If you've ever tried to look up diagnostic criteria or the DSM, you never get the actual DSM. It's some outside thing. This will help you get to the right link. So these resources, you don't need them now, but when we get to that final paper, they're going to be really, really helpful for you. Okay. Other questions? One other thing, some people have asked me, can I change my character? Yes, totally. If you right now would be a good time to do it before you do part 2, right? Once you've done this second part, you've done all that work, it'd be a shame to change it again, but you're welcome to. If you found somebody else in the last couple of weeks and you're like, oh, I got to switch, that's totally fine, right? And it can, another question that somebody asked me yesterday, if you're doing, let's say, like a show, I don't know, I just thought of Dexter because I finished it last night, right? That was really interesting. But like Dexter, for example, they asked me, do I have to do the entire thing, or can I do one episode or one season? It's kind of up to you, right? So if you want to do an entire show, that's fine, or you could focus on one season, one episode. Somebody did Harry Potter a couple of years ago, and they did one movie. Or you could do all movies, right? It's kind of up to you. And again, not a bad idea at some point to maybe look at a couple of these. You can see how people formatted their paper, but you don't need to worry about that part quite yet. Just for now, be thinking about finding a source, get some thoughts down, maybe examples from your film or show, ideas about diagnosis or causes or treatment, and then you can build on that in the final paper. Anything else about this for now? It's not for 3 weeks, but I just wanted to make sure you're thinking about it, working on it. And I'll keep reminding you, especially as we get closer. I mean, spring break is coming too, right? It's only about 3 weeks away. Everyone's kind of in that middle slump of the semester, so it's coming. I just feel like I just keep telling myself that, and all of you, right? It's coming. So is my cruise. No, I'm just I'm so excited about that. I printed all the menus. Did I tell you that already? Yeah, I've been telling everyone I have the food menus. I'm ready to go. All right. So otherwise, we'll move back to where we were before, but I just wanted to take a few minutes to talk about that. The other thing, just to mention, if you're looking at your syllabus, we're supposed to have a QPR speaker. So that's somebody who's going to come in and talk about suicide prevention. You actually get a little certificate as part of the training, which is really neat. You can put it on a resume or an application. They're going to come in, instead of the 8th, they're going to come on the 10th. So when we finish this up, we'll move to eating disorders, and then they'll come in and we'll just kind of go back for a moment to that chapter and then move forward. So they're going to come next week on the 10th. I know it's kind of a difficult topic, but I hope you can be here to benefit from that. It's our health center coming in to present. So traditionally, I think it's kind of helpful, and you get a certificate, like I said, for participating in doing it. All right. So last time, right, we ended here. We talked a little bit about treatment for bipolar disorder, lithium being a very common one. I had a song I wanted to play for you, but I didn't want to go over on our time. So I'll play it for you now, and then we'll move forward. As I said, there's a couple of songs that have been written about lithium, like Nirvana wrote a song about lithium, Evanescence wrote a song about lithium. The Evanescence song is actually much better in terms of actually connecting to the actual drug. The other one's a little more abstract. But I want to play the song and video for you. And I think it's really visually and like lyrically depictive of what a lot of people struggle with when it comes to this drug. Right? Lithium has its upsides and downsides to it. And I think that she really captures that well in her song. So pay attention to the lyrics and the video, and then we can talk about it a little bit afterward. Let me bring this up here. A good depiction, right, of talking about how this drug has some, positives and negatives to it, right? And I think the video as well does a really good job. Right? She's like drowning, it's dark, the water, like there's a lot of like very symbolic things that I think visually in the video. But her struggle that she's singing about is really, really common, right? That people often don't want to like forget how it feels without it, right? That it can kind of cause a little bit of like a numbing in a way, right? If you take the highs and bring them down and the lows and bring them up, sometimes people say that they feel very numb or kind of like a zombie in the middle, that they've lost a little bit of who they are because they've blunted their emotions so much. And so that's something that a lot of people have commented on, in addition to the physical stuff that lithium can cause, that it can be a little bit difficult emotionally and almost feel like it takes some of your personality away, right? And I'm saying the whole song, in a way, like you could almost say that the whole thing is sung about the drug, right? Not wanting to be alone and having it almost be a company in a way. That's the fun and challenging part about music, right, or lyrics, is that you can interpret them in so many different ways. But I think it's a really great example of that battle that a lot of people struggle with that drug. Really, really helpful, but of course has mixed things to it. Well, I don't know, any thoughts or comments or anything on that before we move forward, or any other like questions or thoughts with the mood disorders before we leave them behind? All right, and like I said, normally what we would do from here is go to chapter 7 on suicidality, but our guest speaker will be here next week and they'll talk about that. So we will move to chapter 9 in the meantime, just to keep going. So chapter 9 is all about eating disorders. So kind of switching gears here from mood to eating disorders. Gets bigger. And these are also relatively common disorders. Like a lot of people struggle with eating disorders. I'm sure a lot of you know someone who has an eating disorder, who has maybe battled one at some point in their life. So we'll talk about the big ones, anorexia and bulimia. And then there's a third one that was added a few years ago, binge eating disorder. We'll cover that a little bit. And then we'll look at some causes and treatments as well. We'll do a little case study at the end of this, looking at an example of it and how we could apply some of the things that we've learned to it. So we're gonna take a look at all of these things over the next like class or two together. And just to introduce what these are, right? Eating disorders, as it implies in the name, are a group of disorders where there's a significant disturbance related to eating, right? So a person who has an eating disorder eats or refuses to eat in order to satisfy like a psychological or psychic need, not a physical one. So we're looking at a lot of psychological factors influencing whether or not somebody eats, how much they eat, how much of what they eat they actually hold on to, right? And oftentimes people who have eating disorders are ignoring bodily signals. They're ignoring cues of hunger or cues of being full. And they might even hit a point where they're not aware of them anymore, right? After a certain amount of time of following this pattern, you might not even be as aware of them as you were before maybe developing that pattern. And the tricky thing about eating disorders is food is really complicated, right? The reasons that we eat or don't eat are not simple at all, right? We often eat for reasons beyond just being hungry, right? Easy example. How many of you, by show of hands, eat when you're bored? Like I can put a big hand up to that one, like, or eat when you're sad. How many of you go out to eat to celebrate something good happening? Right? We did this the other day. I got a cake the other day. I buy cakes all the time. The people like Vaughn's know me really well. They're like, what's this for? I'm like, it's Tuesday. You know, they laugh at me and they know by now, it's been years, right? But I bought a cake the other day to celebrate because my kids had their first softball games this week. And they did good and they were excited and it was fun. And so we got a little softball cake to celebrate. I mean, what else are we going to do? Celebrate with a cake, right? Like we could have just said good job, but I was like, let's get a cake. And so, you know, we eat to celebrate. We eat when we're bored. We eat when we're sad. I sometimes will end up eating like a whole thing of snacks while I'm grading. It's almost mindless. I don't even realize I've done it until I'm rooting around in the goldfish bag and it's completely empty. You know, it's really common that we eat for other reasons. I won't go to a movie unless there's popcorn. Like, why bother going to the movie in the theater if there's no popcorn, right? We have these complicated reasons around eating. And so a lot of the times it might seem problematic, but you have to look for patterns, right? So if you binge eat every now and then, that doesn't mean you have an eating disorder. If you don't eat when you're hungry every now and then, that's not a problem. Or if you've eaten to the point where you've made yourself sick every now and then, again, not an issue. But when it becomes a pattern and it's starting to affect things in your life, affect your health and relationships and so on, then we start to look at it in a slightly different way. So some degree of this is very, very common in everyone because, again, food is a little bit complicated. But you oftentimes might see that someone is like on the road to or has warning signs, but that doesn't always necessarily mean they're going to develop an eating disorder. So it's not a clear line, but I'm sure a lot of us at some point have had problematic relationships with food that may or may not escalate. And I have a little clip from a documentary. You know, there's lots of really great documentaries about eating disorders. And then on Netflix, right, the To the Bone was one that came out just a couple of years ago, which is another pretty good one. But the documentary I want to show you a little excerpt from is called Thin. And we have it in our library if you ever wanted to watch the whole thing, or I'm sure you could find it online. But it's just a few minute, like I think it's 7 minutes. It's like a little excerpt from it showing you some cases of people who have eating disorders. In case you've never seen it, I think it gives you a nice human element to it. So I'll bring this up and we'll watch it. It's just about 7 minutes long. It's their little promo video. But I think what it does is it gives you a nice little overview of what this can look like. And again, I imagine a lot of you know someone who has struggled with this. They're relatively common, but in case you hadn't, then you can kind of see a little bit of what that might present itself like, right? And oftentimes what you see with all of the disorders that we're going to talk about here is a very distorted sense of body image, right? And you see that, you know, all these people saying, I don't want to be seen like the fat woman in the circus. And she literally has no fat on her body, like whatsoever. It's so incredibly thin. There's a very distorted perception. And my one criticism of that film, I mean, it focuses on adolescent girls or adolescent women, but This can also affect men as well, right? It doesn't tend to happen as frequently, but it can affect men and women, much more so women than men. But the newer documentaries like the To the Bone one also has some men in it as well, which I think is a better portrayal. But a great little documentary, and I think it sets the stage for us to talk a little bit more about these criteria and what you have to have in order to have one of these disorders. And as I said, there's two main eating disorders that we can talk about: anorexia and bulimia. So we'll talk about anorexia first. So just kind of an overview, right? And then we'll look at the specifics. A serious eating disorder that is associated with an intense fear of weight gain and a distorted body image. It's kind of like the pursuit of extreme thinness and weight loss, really restrictive eating patterns. Oftentimes people who have this disorder are quite thin, they're underweight, and tend to have, again, that distorted view of themselves, seeing themselves not exactly how they are, oftentimes seeing themselves as much larger than they actually are. So there are three main criteria to have this disorder. First one, criteria A, a refusal to maintain let's say normal body weight for your height and age. Now, normal, so subjective, right? So typically, right, if we look at like growth charts and weight charts, there's kind of a range that's expected for your height and your age. And so what we tend to say is less than 85% of what's expected. So there's about a 15% wiggle room. So we could say less than 85% of what's expected. So by definition, you're very underweight, and there's a refusal to maintain like a healthy or normal body weight, right? With a little bit of wiggle room, because again, normal is a very like subjective term. The second part, there's a intense fear of gaining weight. So because there's such an intense fear of gaining weight, what you often see is very, very restrictive eating, right? So eating very, very little, or only eating certain foods, counting calories really excessively. There's such an intense fear of gaining weight that you heavily restrict what you put into your body to avoid any kind of weight gain. And then finally, the third one, C, how to shorten this, there's a disturbance in the view of your body. So disturbance in the view body, you tend to see yourself inaccurately, right? You could see like in the picture in the mirror, how she looks versus how she sees herself, like in her mind. So there's often that distorted body image, and then an undue influence of weight on self-evaluation. What that means is you are really giving way too much like credit or weight to how much you weigh and how that views how you change yourself, how you view yourself, your self-esteem. So you see yourself in a kind of an inaccurate way, right? You're not seeing yourself as you are. And then you give a lot of influence to the weight that you have, as that relates to how you view yourself and see yourself and your self-worth. So very, very common, again, that people who have this are very underweight, restrictive eating. Oftentimes they'll have a number or something in their head where they can't go above that, or it's problematic for them. And then a lot of kind of undue influence, seeing yourself inaccurately, and so on. And this tends to affect women much more drastically than men, but it can affect men as well. Interestingly, for men, we oftentimes see it go in the opposite direction, like stereotypically, men feeling like they need to be bigger and stronger and more muscular. And we sometimes call it muscle dysmorphobia, right? It's kind of like the male presentation of this, though men can also go in the same direction. It's just less common. Are there any Anyone know someone with an eating disorder, or questions or stories or thoughts or comments or anything? Yeah. So B says an intense fear of gaining weight. And then C is a disturbance in the view of your body or an undue influence of weight on self-evaluation. Mhm. So anyone know someone who struggles with an eating disorder? Questions or stories or comments or anything about them? Yeah.
Is it disorder if you scale, does it have to be like you lose weight really drastically, but then you like, is it normal for someone to maintain it? Just keep it there and do whatever they can to keep themselves up.
They might, right? So it could be that someone loses weight and then, do whatever they can to stay there. It's very frequent that people will kind of like go up and down as life intervenes, right? So oftentimes when there are stress or events in your life that are stressful, it can trigger more of this anxiety and more of these feelings, and then people can kind of relapse into that more. But yeah, it can kind of go up and down, or it could be that I need to get to this weight and then I'll do anything I can to stay at it. So I've seen it, it can present either way. Yeah.
Not necessarily to this extent, but myself.
Yeah.
When COVID started, I lost over 100 pounds.
Well,
But it wasn't necessarily to this extent, like I wouldn't start myself, but there were definitely days when I would get my calories to like 1,400, which is not a healthy amount of calories.
mhm.
It was over the course of maybe a year, but
Yeah.
there was probably a period of like 3 months in there where it was sort of pushing disordered eating, not necessarily eating disorder, but
Mhm.
like in retrospect,
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
I didn't necessarily do it the healthiest way.
And do you know, and if it's too much to ask, like, it's okay, but do you know kind of what motivated? Was it like the anxiety and stress of everything, or was it?
Partially anxiety, partially just.
Yeah, yeah, and it can be very much either way. I think, for sharing it, that's a lot, right? And like you said, at times, like, it might be pushing that by.
Yeah, not necessarily this extent. I was hesitant to even share it because I didn't want to like trivialize.
No, not at all. I don't think I hope no one felt that way, but I don't think that you will in the slightest. Oftentimes, a lot of people have struggled in one direction or another because of COVID. A lot of people have gained an incredible amount of weight as like a coping mechanism of being locked in the home alone, trying to feel better. And a lot of people have lost a lot of weight as there are other responses to that. There's been a lot of psychological effects from these last 2 years.
I was kind of started, when I was able to sort of pull myself out of that.
Yeah.
And sort of get to a healthy way to stay there.
Mhm.
Really maintain that.
Yeah, that's fantastic, right? And that's the goal, right? That, sometimes what happens is we get into these patterns, but then we can get out of them. And we just have to be careful with looking for the triggers that might pull us back in, right? Yeah.
I think that also with this, it's like, I know that it's hard because sometimes when people are going through this and they like started, but they were like a normal way, even they lose a lot of weight.
Sure.
People will start to tell them
Yeah.
You're so skinny, you're doing great, and that just eggs everything on. And even like how like it says like some people don't realize that they're in eating disorder,
Yeah.
and then once you start to like reinforce that behavior, then it becomes more like, okay, so what I'm doing is good,
Yeah.
and then that's when it kind of goes into the judgment.
Mhm.
So
Well, that reinforcement piece is so big, right? People all of a sudden noticing you or commenting on how good you look, or maybe, even like, are you sure you're gonna eat that, or not eat that? Like the comments that people make around what we eat, what we wear, how we look, oh man, because they play a big role, right? And like reinforcing that behavior for sure can go to the next level. Any other like thoughts or comments or stories or anything? Like, there's nothing wrong with wanting to lose weight, right? Wanting to lose weight or like gain weight. Sometimes we need to gain weight for certain things or lose weight for certain things. That's not necessarily problematic, right? But it's when you start to have all of this other stuff going on, right? That distorted thinking that all you are is your weight, right? That all that matters about me is my weight. That's when it starts to become a problem, or it's affecting your health in some way. But there's nothing wrong with wanting to lose weight to be healthier, or maybe like working out or trying to be, fit or healthy or any of those things. That's not problematic. But when it goes to that next level, that's when it changes a little bit. Yeah.
I don't, like, I know you just said it, and I'm not like trying to like go at you, but I don't like the word, nothing wrong with losing or gaining weight. I think she always nothing wrong with being chunky. Sure, just because, like, I have a sister who's like a little bit chubby, and it's always been like, oh, in order to be healthy, you lose weight. And she doesn't, she's gone to the doctor, and it's always for time.
Yeah.
There's nothing wrong.
Yeah, no, and it's if you want to do those things, right? Sometimes people put on weight to meet a certain criteria for sports or to bulk up so that they're healthier. Like my mom has to gain weight because she's underweight, right? There's nothing wrong with that. Or losing weight, there's nothing wrong with that. It could be either, right? So like for wrestling or boxing, you have to be in a certain weight class. You might have to drop weight or lose weight. It depends on which way you're trying to go. So it's really common that people make one pursuit or the other. I won't ask you how many of you have dieted at some point in your life, but I imagine most of you, right? Most of us at some point will try to either gain or lose weight or maybe maintain. So it's important to decide how you view healthy, right? Like, and healthy can mean so many things, and it means something different to each one of us, right? Like what's healthy to you is probably very different than what's healthy to me and vice versa for everyone else. So I don't think there's anything wrong with saying losing or gaining, but I think that the health behind it is an important factor, right? Like, what reason are you doing it for? Is important. Motivation behind it is something to consider. So this is like I said, the one presentation. I'll write it up here. 95% of cases occur between 14 to 18-year-old girls. Okay, so 95%. So the vast majority of people that struggle with this are teenage girls. That's when it tends to start. But again, this can be people who are younger. It can be people who are older. It can be people who identify as male, female, or other. But this could be anyone, right? It isn't necessarily a gendered disorder, though it does present more in girls than in boys, or men than in women. But yeah, it's a difficult one. We'll talk about the factors that influence this later. But one of my kids, my daughter Kaya, who's 9, she's always been bigger, right? Like for her age, like she's still within the range of what is like normal. Like the doctor never says like you need to lose weight, but he'll say stuff like you need to keep an eye on it. Like the subtle messages that like we all pick up on when people say. And she's been bullied for it her whole life. Like she's starting to level out to like her peers. But when we talk about the causes and contributors, those messages like from doctors, from other people, they can definitely play, a very big role. The other big disorder here in this category is this, and it applies to the same range, being the most common. Throwing things. Is bulimia. Bulimia is a little different in the way that it presents itself, sometimes called binge purge syndrome because of the pattern that it tends to follow. But with this one, we have an eating disorder where people tend to binge and then do something to compensate for the binge. Right? So they engage in what are called compensatory behavior, something to compensate for the food they've consumed to avoid gaining weight. Right? So this is a very like cyclical pattern-driven disorder where people eat, and then often to the point of being uncomfortable, then they purge it in some way in order to avoid gaining weight from it. We'll talk about binge eating disorder as the last one, where people just don't purge in any way. But this one often does have that compensatory purging behavior being directly connected to it. So the first thing is you have recurrent episodes of binge eating. So binge eating, we tend to define as eating more than most people would eat in a period of time. Now that's super subjective. Again, where there's a lot of subjectivity here. What I could eat in 2 hours might be different from what you could eat in 2 hours, especially if it's a cake competition. I can eat a lot of cake. I'm well trained in the art of eating cake and pie, but eating within a 2-hour period of time. Right, a period of time of 2 hours, people eat, the terminology is eating food larger than most would eat. The other element involved in the binge is that there's a lack of control during that binge. You can't stop, right? You just keep going and keep going, often to the point of being uncomfortably full. So the idea is that you have recurrent episodes of binge eating, right? So they're happening repeatedly. Once in a while, not necessarily an issue, but that they're happening repeatedly. Eating within a short period of time, we usually define it as 2 hours, eating more than most would eat, and feeling a lack of control during the binge. So oftentimes, again, what that means is eating and you don't stop, or you almost can't stop. It just keeps going. The other thing is you have compensatory behaviors. To prevent waking. What are some of the ways that people might compensate for a binge? What are some of the things that you might do to prevent yourself from gaining weight from the food you ate? You think of one? Yeah.
Work out really heavily for a long period of time.
Yeah, right. Excessive working out. Maybe you work out for hours and hours and hours to try and burn it off. That's a great example. What else might we do? Yeah.
Yes. Well,
Yeah. Right. It's the most classic presentation of this is forcing yourself to throw up or vomit. Yeah.
walk it off.
Walk it off, right? It's kind of the same idea as that. It would be excessive walking or working it off, right? Yeah. Laxatives is another one. People taking laxatives to force themselves to eliminate it out of their body, right? So that they don't absorb any of the calories and nutrients. Those are all really, really common ways that people compensate. That's what a compensatory behavior is. You're compensating for the food you put in and then eliminating. Right? And again, if this happens once, we wouldn't necessarily view it as a disorder. It might be problematic, right? And it would depend on the person and the motivation, but this is happening repeatedly, that people are exercising excessively or using laxatives or throwing up to prevent themselves from gaining weight from that food. You have to have binges and compensatory behavior. So I'm going to abbreviate. So binges and compensatory behavior. I'm just going to make that BC here. CB, I mean. I reversed it in my head. Binges and compensatory behaviors have to happen at least twice a week for a minimum of 3 months. Now it can be way more than that. The average tends to be way more than that. But in order to kind of qualify this, it has to be at least twice a week for at least 3 months. Now, again, it's often much, much more than that, but it can be at least that in order to qualify. And then the last one is the same as the one for anorexia, that your self-evaluation is unduly influenced by weight. Unduly influenced by weight. So same thing that you would see with anorexia, that your weight is kind of determining your self-worth, right? Your self-esteem, how you feel about yourself, right? Your self-evaluation, how you view yourself, and everything related to that is very unduly or like over-influenced by your weight. And people who have a lot of compensatory behaviors, it can cause medical issues, kind of like they talked about in the clip. People start losing their hair because they're not getting the nutrients from the food, having problems with their teeth and with their throat from making themselves vomit, stomach issues from taking laxatives excessively. Like it can cause medical issues for people if they're doing this really, really frequently. So it might cause weight loss, but it also tends to take a toll. The one girl said she hadn't had a menstrual cycle in 3.5 years. When you're really underweight, that can happen. Swollen glands, right? There's a whole host of things that can happen to people when they're forcing themselves to vomit or use laxatives excessively. It can definitely become very problematic. Anyone have stories or comments or anything about this one? People who have it, or any thoughts? Yeah.
Doesn't, it's going a long time, and I never got Well, my dad's a nurse,
Mhm.
and so when families are trying to choose, they usually it's just to see if they need to go to the hospital.
Sure.
She got a phone call, we were out to dinner from my aunt who was crying on the phone because her daughter was, I found out that she was puking blood
Well,
because she'd been doing it for so long that the acid was like burning her esophagus.
yeah,
For puking for so long. And I remember my dad was like, yeah, she's the hospital immediately. She was like put into immediate surgery, like it was a big deal.
yeah, and that's that example that like the long-term effects, the medical effects of this can take a toll, especially if you've been doing it for a long time like that. And how scary, right, to have blood be coming up. Obviously something you would have to go to a doctor for, and then it sometimes then forces you into treatment when you maybe weren't ready or didn't want to. Other thoughts or questions or stories or comments, anything? People that you know? It's portrayed in the media a lot, right? It's definitely something that we see a lot of in the media. Again, mainly tending to affect young women, but it definitely can affect anyone, right? But that's the most common age and range for both disorders. And so, as I mentioned earlier, occasional binge eating is totally not a problem. Like I'm sure you've all had a moment where you've eaten way too much and you're uncomfortably full. That happens. My daughter Paisley ate 3 pretzels at softball last night and was like, I don't feel good and I ate too much, right? That's not necessarily a problem. But when you're doing it repeatedly and then finding ways to get rid of that food so that you don't gain weight from it, that's when you start to fit the criteria for a disorder like this. And there is one more disorder that's very directly connected to this, but it lacks the compensatory behaviors. But before we do that, I want to play a clip for you. I just want you to think kind of critically about it. There's a lot of competitive eating that people do, right? I don't know if any of you have ever watched competitive eating or participated in competitive eating. I once took second in a pie eating contest. I was very proud, but now I hate pie, right? Like it made me so sick. I ate way too many whipped cream pies, and now when I see them, like, no, thank you, because I ate way too many of them. But really interesting. Be thinking about as you watch this, it's a hot dog eating competition that I'm going to show you. But as you watch this, be thinking, do you think that these people have an eating disorder or not, right? And why? And we can talk about it a little bit after. All right. This may or may not make you want hot dogs ever again, but people are able to eat. But what do you think, right? If we look at these criteria and we think about this like a little bit critically, would you say that would you lean toward them having an eating disorder, not having an eating disorder? What do you think? Any comments or thoughts? Yes, no, maybe, not sure. What do you think? Yeah.
Maybe because like if you have to like practice, so I don't think anyone just goes up there and can eat 66 hot dogs on
Sure.
try. So I think it could be depending on how serious you're with it, it could end up being something for it because they're practicing.
Okay. I like that. So you're saying maybe, right? Because clearly this is something they're having to do repeatedly, right? Okay, that's a great start. What do you think? Yeah.
I was gonna say yes, because if you look behind all these competitors, all year, they have to prepare to like eat solid for every meal and super healthy,
Sure.
just so their body doesn't, break down.
Mhm.
So I feel like they're compensating the unhealthy eating competition.
Oh, right. So the fact that they're having those compensatory behaviors and that it's all year and all of the effort they're putting in. Okay, great. Yeah.
I'm more of a maybe, but I'm leaning more towards no, because they're doing it for a prize and not because like they're unhappy with anything or being influenced by weight or looks or lack of control.
Okay, so the motivation behind it is a big piece, and I think that is something we definitely have to consider, right? They're doing it because they make a lot of money doing these things. The prizes are big. There's fame associated with it, for sure. Yeah.
I agree with that as far as the motivation. I think it definitely can lead to that.
Yeah.
And I would not be surprised if at least some of them do,
Right.
but I do agree that the motivations here too.
Yeah, and I think having that thought of like, it could lead to it. If they don't, maybe it could lead there. Like, there's a lot of like kind of maybes that we have, right? Like, I'm on the line, yeah.
Look at it, unless it leads to them being unhealthy, then that's an issue. But you have to look at it as a culture, them themselves are a culture, and
Yeah.
and that culture is not something behavior, it's normal. And if they're doing it in a healthy way, like if they're being taken care of while they're practicing about this, everybody gets support.
Yeah, and I love that you viewed it as a culture, right? Because it is, like, there's a culture of competitive eating, there's a culture between those people that are in that clip. And within that culture, that is normal, right? And so that's a big important piece to look at. Anybody have any other thoughts? Yeah.
I think like, although this is, competition style, I think that it kind of like sort of is into, like, have you seen like food things or like mukbangs?
So what, say that again?
Mukbangs, they're like, so they're on this YouTube, like, people who have like hundreds of dollars in fast food.
Oh, yeah, okay. Mhm.
And I think that like, because that's kind of the same, like they're doing it for entertainment.
Yes.
purposes.
Mhm.
But at the same time, I think that that leads more towards something super rather than like you're competing with someone.
Sure. Okay, so the competition and that there's like a whole group of people doing this changes it a little bit for you. Yeah, there's a lot of people who like on YouTube or on TikTok or on whatever platform, eat massive amounts of food or eat awful foods for people to watch, right? And to gain money from it and popularity from it. Did you have a thought as well?
There's a guy on YouTube that you can watch from like 10 years ago when
Oh.
he was skinny, and he has a YouTube page that he does mukbangs.
Mhm.
And now he's like super overweight and has like mental problems, and he posts it on YouTube.
Yeah,
And it's like from eating too much as an entertainment and like not being aware of it.
yeah, he has a huge following too, right? Like you're talking. Yeah, there's a ton of people who do this. I mean, my close friends, they go on Twitch. They're the ones who got me into Twitch, the ones I always use as an example. Like they at least once a month have like some bizarre food eating thing that people can donate like money to them as they eat like random stuff. Like they drink ranch sodas the other day, which just sounds absolutely disgusting. But they drank like ranch and pickled sodas, just, I mean, as a way to earn money. Right? That's part of like their career. People, hundreds and hundreds of people watch them and give them bits and money to do that. So, I mean, I think the motivation behind it is huge, right? And a lot of you mentioned that. I would be worried that maybe they're on the path to it, but I lean toward no, because of the culture that they have. Like Kobayashi, there's a documentary about him. He is ripped. If you've ever seen that, he is like a 12 pack. I mean, it's ridiculous, like how much he works out and exercises. They train all year, but they do throw up after a lot of the competitions. They're forcing themselves to throw up. They're eating. That's definitely qualifying as a binge, right? But they make a lot of money. It's oftentimes their career or their livelihood. I think all of those things come into play, but it starts to get slippery, right? What about the person who is losing a bunch of weight so that they can dance, right? Oftentimes dance and gymnastics, there's an incredible amount of pressure to be a certain weight or have a certain body type, or the boxer or wrestler who's gaining weight in order to be in a certain class or losing weight to be in a certain class. I think it's kind of a slippery slope. And so in general, I think it's safe to say like the behaviors are problematic. Like I love how you said it earlier, that maybe you didn't have an eating disorder, but you had disordered eating. I think that's a really great way of thinking about it, that you can have problematic patterns with food without necessarily having a. I think looking at the whole picture is important. Like I would say they need a lot of this, but I'm not sure that I would say that it's a disorder yet. But some of them, it wouldn't surprise me at all if some of them do struggle with food outside of the competition arena. Yeah.
Really? I used to know a kid in high school who would carry a plastic water bottle, he would spit in it. Anytime he had saliva come out because his ocean wanted him to have water weight.
Yeah.
So he was completely dehydrated himself to fit into
Yeah.
the class. And I was like, what in the world?
Right.
Was that classified as more as like, not an eating disorder, but disorder eating?
I would definitely put that on like a problematic, like it would make you worried, right? Like it caught your attention. I mean, even you're getting rid of your spit and dehydrating yourself so that you, I mean, there's a physical toll it's taking for a very specific reason. Yeah, so it would make me worry, and you'd have to, I think, watch it. You know, a lot of the times with this stuff, you want to keep an eye on it and see which way it goes. Yeah.
Yeah, in high school, I dated a wrestler, and he
yeah, whenever he would like cut or, bin or whatever, would gain weight, lose weight,
Yeah,
it was really shocking to me how like unhealthy a lot of it was. Like a lot of times he would only eat chicken and protein powder,
mhm.
and I was like, or I'm like, let's go to dinner, and he's like, I can't eat for the next 3 days. And I'm
Yeah.
like, that's
Yeah, that's problematic,
Yeah.
right? There's something concerning about that.
Mhm.
Yeah, and again, it's for specific motivation. But at what point do we say like, it's gone beyond a point where we're comfortable? And I think there's not a clear line.
Obviously, that Russian figure skaters.
Yeah, yeah,
where, I mean, there's a reason why you only ever see Russian figure skaters in the Olympics one time,
yeah,
because so many of them develop eating disorders
Mhm.
or others that they'd be so skinny
Yeah.
that make the quad jumps that other countries can't do.
Right.
Because they don't abuse their athletes like that.
That's a really, really recent example, right? There's a lot of talk about that. The gymnastics, the Olympics, like you see a lot of that in the Olympics, people who have gone to the extreme to be at the top of their game, right? And sometimes it takes an incredible toll, even if there is an incredible advantage to it at some point as well. Right? I love it. Thank you so much for all the comments and talk. I love it. It's great. Anything else before I keep going? I'm going to talk about the last disorder. Maybe I should wait looking at the time. We have the one last one. So I think I'll start here next time rather than going all the way through it. But I do think that, if there's one takeaway with this, again, seems like the last five, I don't think that it's ever as clear as we want it to be, right? I think with most disorders, we tend to have this idea that people either have it or they don't, right? That it'd be obvious. And I think especially with eating disorders, there's a lot of gray. There's a lot of gray area where maybe somebody has like signs that are problematic or they're on a path to it, but we wouldn't quite say that it's a problem yet. Right. And so I think that's just something to keep in mind with these. It's not always as black and white as I think we tend to make them out to be. So what we'll do on Tuesday, I forgot what day it was for a moment. On Tuesday, we'll keep going here. We'll talk about binge eating disorder. We'll look at some causes, some treatments, and then we'll do, as I said, a little case study. And then just to remind you, next Thursday on the 10th, we will have that guest speaker coming in to talk about chapter 7. If you're wondering what happened to chapter 7. So I hope you all have a wonderful weekend. It's supposed to rain tonight, tomorrow. I've got my fingers crossed for that. It's down to 40%, so that means probably not, right? But we'll see. But have a wonderful weekend. I'll see you all on Tuesday. Okay, let's see. Hi.
So not here the week before spring break.
Okay.
See that